Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Jamie Larmer. I am the youth coordinator with the Center for Disability Empowerment. And like I said, before we get started, we'll go ahead and cover some webinar etiquette for today. All attendees will be muted during this webinar. You can use the chat feature in Zoom to post questions and communicate with our different panelists. This webinar is being recorded and will be broadcasted to Facebook and shared on our YouTube page shortly. And to view the slide deck and the panelists side by side, please refer to the control panel at the bottom of your screen. The More option will bring up a drop list of settings. Click on side-by-side mode to see the speakers and slides simultaneously. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our moderator, Carla Waring.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, part 2 of accessible voting. The webinar is hosted by the Center for Disability Empowerment. We're located in Columbus, Ohio, and we're a part of the independent living centers. There are 12 across the state of Ohio. We're one of 12, and we serve 4-county area, Franklin, Union, Delaware, and Licking County. However, you can always call us and we can provide you the information on how to get a hold of the independent living center near you. We provide 5 core services: information and referral, advocacy, independent living skills, peer support, and transition services. We also have another project we're working on. It's called Access Ohio. And we provide information, training, consultation around the Americans with Disabilities Act, and also can provide a physical access survey at businesses, local government, people who want to know more about the physical accessibility of the ADA can contact us and we can give you more information on that. So we look forward to hearing from you, and feel free to reach out to us after this training and we can discuss anything you need. We would help you try to find that. So we're going to get started with today's webinar on accessible voting. So the Americans with Disabilities Act turned 30 this year in July, and in recognition of that, CDE is hosting monthly webinars. Today's webinar is on accessible voting. It's part 2 of a part 1 we had in August. After today's webinar, I will be sending to all of our registrants the slide deck for both part 1 and part 2, because we had some really good information in part 1 that we want to make sure you have as well. We do these every Tuesday, the 4th Tuesday of each month from 11 to noon. So today is dedicated to accessible voting and resources and information on candidate and issue research. Next month, our focus is going to be on employment. In November, we're going to talk about service animals, and December will be higher ed. So we hope that you tune in for those ADA talks in the future, and we're really happy to have you with us today. So our agenda is going to look like this. I'm going to do a little bit of a review of part 1, and then I'm going to turn it over to Maggie with Disability Rights Ohio, and she's going to share with us some of her resources. Then Jen Miller from the League of Women Voters is going to talk to us about Vote 411, important dates, and election planning and how to prepare an election plan. We're going to hear from our very own Executive Director, Sue Hetrick, with additional resources. But we're really excited is to have an opportunity to open this up to questions, your questions, specific questions that you have about the voting process, get some clarification, how to resources that you need to know to be an informed voter. And then we'll wrap up with just a little bit more information on who we are, how to get a hold of us, and the next steps with the slide deck that we'll be sending you. So this slide is a picture of Justin Dart. He is the co-founder of the ADA and kind of considered the godfather of the ADA. He also founded the American Association of People with Disabilities. And he's saying here, a quote, "Vote as if your life depends on it, because it does." And I can't really, I really want to acknowledge something that happened recently on Friday, the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and acknowledgement that the AAP, the Association of People with Disabilities, said of her passing. And this is a quote that they, and I will send this in your email that I send out to you with the slide deck. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a champion for justice. Justice Ginsburg authored many opinions that embraced the principles of disability rights movement and addressed the ways that paternalism so often results in segregation from society. She authored the majority opinion of Olmsted, a decision which held that people with disabilities have the right to live and integrated in our communities, not segregated within institutions. Her life's work directly benefited the lives of millions of individuals with disabilities and our country as a whole. We will continue to build upon her legacy and fight for justice and equal treatment under the law. May her memory be a blessing. So I just wanted to share that with you, and also set the tone for today's webinar and the resources and information we're going to be hearing from our presenters. So really, voting is one of the greatest rights and responsibilities that any person has in our democracy. And we put together this webinar to share information to help you become an informed voter, to know the important dates, to know what resources are available for you to get information on how to vote and when to vote, and also how to build an election plan to make it personal to you, what you need to be a successful and informed voter. So most importantly, you can't vote unless you're registered. And the good news is you still have time to register. You can register two different ways. You can do it online at voteohio.gov, or you can get a paper voter registration form from your Board of Elections. They can send you that form. You can pick it up at your local library. You can call our office to get that information as well. Most importantly, you have until October 5th to be able to vote, to be able to register to vote for the next election, which is November 3rd. So if you haven't already registered, please do that first. And do it before October 5th. Once you vote, you have three different ways. Once you register, you have three different ways to vote. And we're going to dive a little deeper into these different ways. We also touched on it pretty significantly at our part 1. So when you get the slide deck, you'll have a lot of information on this, as well as you'll hear about it today. But basically, there are three different ways to vote. One is absentee voter by mail. So this is where you would get your ballot sent to your home, and you would take your time and vote at home and then mail it in. The second way to vote is, it's called early in-person voting. And that's where you would go to the Board of Elections in your county, and they have specific dates and times that they're going to be open prior to the November 3rd election. You can go in and vote in person there. The third way is actual day of the election, which is November 3rd. So there's three different ways to vote, and we're going to talk more about those ways, and especially important dates to be able to get your vote to count. We're also going to be really encouraging people to have an election plan, and that is making sure your registration is up to date And you can find that information out through the county, your county board of elections. Also, you want to figure out how are you going to vote? What's going to be the best way for you to vote? Is it going to be at home and then sending your ballot back in the mail? Is it going to be going into the board of elections and voting there in person? Or is it going to be the day of the vote? And so you want to really think about which way is going to be best for you, and making sure you have everything you need, your ID, how you're going to get there, and information, and researching what candidates are on the ballot, how are you going to vote, and the issues that are also on the ballot, and what's going to meaningful to you. And the most important thing is to vote. So now we're going to start our presentations, and our first speaker is going to be Maggie with Disability Rights Ohio.
Hey everyone, so my name is Maggie Scotece. I am a staff attorney with Disability Rights Ohio. So this is my contact information. If you have any questions following the webinar, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at this contact information. It's also going to be listed at the end of my presentation as well. So I want to talk about, for just a second, some of the important takeaways from my portion of this presentation. My presentation is going to cover a lot of detailed information about special circumstances for voting, but I want you to take away a couple big issues, which is that you have a right to vote and you have a right to a reasonable accommodation to address barriers to voting. You have a right to a private and secure ballot, and if you have any questions or concerns about voting, about your voting rights, accessing voting, or special voting circumstances, I would highly encourage you to contact our hotline or our intake line to ask those questions, whether they are leading up to voting or if you're actually in line on election day and have an issue with accessibility. I would also encourage you to contact us at that point in time. So if you haven't heard of Disability Rights Ohio, we are a statewide nonprofit organization in the state of Ohio. We are Ohio's protection and advocacy organization, which means we're actually federally designated to protect and advocate for the civil and legal rights of people of disabled people in the state of Ohio. We're also Ohio's designated CAP program, which means we help people with disabilities getting services under the Rehabilitation Act. So that's the Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation, as well as opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities. We don't have any cost or income requirements for our services, which means you don't have to be making below a certain level to be able to qualify for services. We offer our services to all Ohioans with disabilities. And then we also have annual priorities for services, which means that's how we decide how we're spending our time and money during the year, is we go out to the community and ask our community what they would like us to be spending our time and money on. And we use those to create our annual priorities for our services. So one of the first big questions we get is, what if you need help filling out forms, whether that is your registration for voting or it is your application for an absentee ballot? You can get help filling out that form by a person of your choice. There is some pending litigation that is going to impact some of these answers right now. But generally you can print your name in your own handwriting if cursive is not an option for you. You can also generally mark an X on the signature line and have somebody else watch you. If you need to mark an X because you can't sign your full name, you can have, you'll have to have the person who has watched you sign it actually write down their name and address so they can verify your signature on the actual ballot. And if you have questions about how to accomplish that, feel free to reach out to Disability Rights Ohio. We can talk you through that process. Additionally, if you can't even mark an X on your ballot, you can request a reasonable accommodation to have a person actually assist you in filling out your ballot and signing the form. And as always, you can appoint an attorney in fact to go ahead and sign the forms for you. Once you have actually completed your registration, you can also get help at the polls. So if you are a person with a disability who needs help completing the process of voting at the actual polls, you can have a person of your choice come assist you for that process. And generally it can be any one of your choice except for an employer, an agent of your employer, an agent of your union, or a candidate for office. Other than that, it can be whoever you want. It doesn't have to be a family member. It doesn't have to be your guardian. It can be whoever you feel most comfortable with having assist you. You're not required to accept any assistance though. So if you have a family member who is forcing you to accept their assistance when you're trying to vote, that would be a violation of the law. Additionally, your guardian cannot force you to accept their assistance when you're attempting to vote. And if you don't have anyone in your personal life who can assist you through voting and you need assistance while voting, you can ask for someone to help you at the actual polls. And additionally, if you have somebody assisting you to vote, nobody can tell you what you should be voting for, even if they are assisting you. You should still be the one making the decisions about what your vote is going to be. And like I said, if you don't have anybody in your personal life who can assist you, you can request that 2 poll workers from opposite parties assist you in casting your ballot. Additionally, if you cannot sign your name in the poll book, poll workers must sign it for you if that's something that your disability prevents you from being able to sign your name. And if you have a guardian, you do not have to have your guardian with you to vote, nor may they tell you how to vote. You do not have to ask their permission to vote. You don't have to have them with you. You don't have to have papers saying that you have a right to vote with a guardianship. Generally speaking, if you have a guardian, your voting rights should remain intact. There's also sometimes time limits in voting booths. So generally speaking, if all voting booths are in use, there's a time limit of 10 minutes to complete your voting process. However, this does not apply to people with disabilities. And if somebody tells you that you need to hurry up and finish up voting within the 10-minute time period, you can ask for a reasonable accommodation or assistance if you need it to be able to complete your voting process. Additionally, like any other voter, you are allowed to bring sample ballots into your voting booth with you to help you complete your voting process. So this is a really big question we get, is what happens if I have a guardian? As I mentioned earlier, generally speaking, having a guardian should not take away your right to vote. There's very few circumstances in which case a guardianship will actually remove your right to vote, and that has to be done by the probate court, and they have to make it a specific finding that you are incompetent for the purposes of voting. This is really rare. Most times, people who have guardians have retained their right to vote. If a court has taken away your right to vote, they are required to notify your Board of Elections to let you know that your voting rights have been removed. You can also check with your Board of Elections or check your guardianship documentation to see if this has happened. If you have any questions about whether or not this has happened in your case, you're more than welcome to contact Disability Rights Ohio, and we can help walk you through the process of figuring out if that designation has been made for you. But generally speaking, even if you have a guardianship, your rights to voting are retained, and your guardian does not get to choose who you vote for or how you vote. Those are decisions that are yours and yours alone. Another big question we get is, what if you have physical barriers to accessing the building to vote? So voting locations are legally required to be accessible for people with disabilities, which means they have to be free of barriers when exiting and entering. This includes ramps, wide doors, and accessible parking. However, especially in a year like this, when lots of polling locations are changing later in the year, there may be issues with accessibility. So if you are physically unable to enter the polling location for physical accessibility reasons, you are able to curbside vote. Specifically this year, the state Secretary of State has encouraged voting locations to allow anybody who doesn't feel comfortable entering the polling location to also vote curbside as a result of concerns about COVID-19. And if you are planning to vote curbside, I would contact your Board of Elections prior to Election Day to see what their process is for curbside voting. Each voting district is going to have their own process for how they actually complete curbside voting. So I would contact your Board of Elections to see what their specific process is. If you do participate in curbside voting, 2 voting officers from different political parties are going to come out of the building and bring you a ballot where you can either sit in your car and complete your ballot, or complete your ballot like on the outside of the building using the wall of the building or using whatever means you need. But it allows you to not have to actually enter the building and go into a polling booth to be able to complete your ballot. Another big question we get is if you have a print or visual disability. So polling locations are required by law to have accessible voting machines for blind and low vision voters. And that generally means that you have a set of headphones that you can plug in to the voting machine, and you can listen to the ballot being read to you by a screen reader, and you can complete your ballot that way. However, if you are not planning to vote in person and would still like to vote using absentee methods, Ohio does have an ability to have what's called a remote access voting tool, which allows you to request your absentee ballot, and your Board of Elections will email you a copy of the ballot. You fill it out using your screen reader on your computer, then you print it out and mail it back to your Boards of Elections. It isn't online voting, but it's a way for you to get the ballot emailed to you so you can still use your assistive technology to complete the ballot. Another common question we get is people who are confined to public or private institutions. So that can be people who are living in residential facilities. It can be people who are in mental health facilities. And you do have a right to request an absentee ballot in writing, and you have to note on that request that you are in a private or public institution. Once you make that request to elections officials, again, generally will come from your county board of elections and will deliver the absentee ballot to you. This only applies if your institution is in the same county where you're registered to vote. If you are going to be there for the longer than 30 days prior to the election, then that would count as your residence for your registration to vote. If you are in a shorter term, you might fall under a different special circumstance that I will talk about later. Additionally, because there are still public institutions and hospitals and the like that have limited the number of people who can access the institution, if an institution is locked down for reasons such as COVID, the Secretary of State has asked that all institutions have a plan for designating employees who can complete this process from either political party, who can help residents complete their voting process. Another big question, especially right now, is what if you're unable to travel from your home on election day, such as if you're quarantining for COVID-19, or you've been diagnosed with COVID-19 and can't go out in public. You can still vote. You can still contact your boards of elections and request that they deliver you a special absentee ballot, and you're confined to your home. You have to complete the form and return it to your board of elections, and these requests are due no later than noon the Saturday prior to the election. So for this year, that's going to be October 31st, 2020. Another often question we get is, what if you are hospitalized or your minor child is hospitalized on election day, especially if people who have chronic disabilities? This is a real concern for them. If you or your minor child must stay in the hospital for medical reasons as a result of an accident or an unforeseeable medical emergency, you can still vote. You have to fill out and sign a required absentee ballot request and return it to your board of elections. The request must say where and why you were in the hospital, as well as the date of your admission. If the hospital is in the same county where you're registered to vote, two Board of Elections officials will bring a ballot to you and wait for you to vote and take your ballot back to the Board of Elections. If you are from if you are in a hospital that's outside the county where you are registered to vote, you still can obtain a ballot. We have helped people obtain ballots both through fax and email if that's necessary to complete your process. These requests must be you must request your ballot by 3 p.m. on election day. That's the cutoff for this to happen. After 3 p.m., you're not going to be able to access this process. If you're going to participate in any of these special circumstances processes, I would highly suggest you contact Disability Rights Ohio. These processes are pretty complicated and they can get confusing very quickly. And because they're often such short time spans, having one of our attorneys who can help you work through that process can be really helpful. Again, we all know COVID-19 is still a concern for this election, and it's going to be a concern up until voting day at this point. So depending on your Board of Elections, they're going to have different rules about what voting looks like for them. Some of these rules may be that you have to wear a mask to enter the facility. I know there have been discussions about people being able to vote curbside if they don't feel comfortable wearing a mask in voting polling locations. They may require you to stay 6 feet from other voters. They may require you to wait so that surfaces can be disinfected between voters. You might be asked if you have any symptoms of COVID-19. None of these should impact your ability to actually vote. It may impact the way you vote, but it shouldn't impact your ability to actually vote. And if you have concerns about not being able to access voting for any of these reasons, I would encourage you to call either Disability Rights Ohio or one of the election protection hotlines that we'll talk about later. So as I mentioned earlier, there are different places you can call if there are elections violations that you see occurring on election day. If you're having a problem accessing voting, I would encourage you to call Disability Rights Ohio first, because we tend to deal with those a lot, and we have a live hotline on election day, so we can help you resolve the situation at that time. However, if there are other things that you need to contact or report, you can also report it to the U.S. Department of Justice Voting Section Compliance and Guidance, as well as the Election Protection Lawyers Committee. Disability Rights Ohio does have several resources on voting rights. So we have our voting rights FAQ as well as our voting rights publication. Most of our resources are available both in ASL as well as a couple other languages. And if they're not accessible to you in the format that they're currently in, I would encourage you to contact us and we will make them accessible to you. We also do these types of webinars, as well as we answer voting questions all year round. If you submit an intake request with us, you'll be referred to an attorney who can answer your specific voting question. And this is the biggest thing that I want to talk about. So Disability Rights Ohio, for every election, including primaries, has a voter hotline. Our election hotline runs from 6:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that's the entire time polls are open. And you can call in and be directed immediately to one of our staff and an attorney who can talk through whatever concerns you're having. We generally talk about accessibility issues, but if you have other questions, we will answer those as well that have to do with voting. Additionally, leading up to the election, you can call our intake hotline. And while currently we're working from home, so you have to leave a message, you will get a call back from somebody who is going to help you walk through the process of whatever voting question it is that you have. And then this is my contact information, both my specific contact information, as well as DRO's contact information, if you have any questions about this presentation after the webinar is finished. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie. Wow, that is a lot of information, and really appreciate you going through it and providing links. Remember, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint that will have everything that's on the PowerPoint, and you will get it this week. So you will have this information as well in a written form. Next, we're going to hear from the League of Women Voters. The Executive Director, Jen Miller, is with us. She has been a very busy woman this year, and we really appreciate her spending some time and talking about 411. Reviews ways, she's going to review some ways to vote and provide us some important dates and information about using and researching on 411.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Maggie. I'm really thankful for DRO, Disability Rights Ohio, and Center for Disability Empowerment. The work you do is absolutely critical. The League of Women Voters is 100 years old this year. We've been fighting for voting rights for all Ohioans for 100 years. And so that the upper left-hand corner is some smiling ladies. That's many of my staff and interns. We do a lot of public gatherings where we talk about public policy that affects voters. We lobby directly to the General Assembly, the federal government, and to the Secretary of State and local boards of elections about many issues, including disability access issues. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So I just want to review some things because I want to make sure you all have an election plan. Here's the deal. Elections are confusing. A lot of people are rethinking how they're going to participate in this election because of COVID-19. So we just want to help you, and you'll get these slides as reminders, and please feel free to share these images on social media if you like. Our deadline for voter registration is Monday, October 5th, but also, that's your deadline for checking to make sure your registration is up to date. Keep in mind that a lot of individuals have been removed from the rolls if they haven't voted in 6 years. Also, a lot of people forget to update their registration if they have a name change or they move. So go ahead and just check your registration, make sure it's correct by October 5th. Absentee ballots will be mailed out to voters starting October 6th. And then you have until November 2nd to postmark November 3rd to deliver that ballot. Early voting is 28 days in advance, but keep in mind that each week are slightly different hours. And please don't wait to request your absentee ballot or to postmark your absentee ballot. So let's keep in mind that there are 3 different ways to vote, and it's important for you to decide which way works best for you. If you're going to vote absentee, request that ballot right away. You're going to want to fill that out right away, get it in the mail, postmark it by November 2nd, or drop it off to the Board of Elections, not to your polling location in your neighborhood, to the Board of Elections. Early voting is a really great option. If you want to vote in person, I really encourage you to vote early. We have 28 days of early voting. There's 1 location in each county. So again, check your hours, check the location address, and then bring ID. If you don't have your ID with you, you can enter, during early voting, you can enter the last 4 digits of your social security number, though checking in is a little bit easier if you bring ID. On election day, you absolutely have to bring your ID. For more information on that, we would be happy to help you. Next slide. Okay, so make your voting plan today, and then I want you to stick with it. So check that voter registration, as we talked about. You have till October 5th. Decide which of the 3 ways you want to vote: absentee, which is also sometimes called voting by mail, early person at your county's early vote center, or in person on election day in your neighborhood location, remembering also that polling locations always change. So you're going to want to check, well, they often change. So you're going to want to check that. So think about the logistics with each one. Do you have stamps? Do you know the address? Do you know the hours? Do you need a ride? Do you have your ID? You can research your ballot. One of those locations is vote411.org, and then of course show up to vote. So the absentee system, which a lot of you may use for the first time, remember first you need to request an application. You probably got an application, you need to request a ballot through an application. You may have gotten an application or even several of them in the mail. That's okay. But if you didn't get an application, you can print one out from voteohio.gov, or you can call. You need to sign that and mail that back to your local Board of Elections or deliver to your Board of Elections. Complete that absentee ballot right away. Make sure you sign the ballot and the envelope. Remember, you have to prove yourself twice, once to qualify for the absentee ballot and once for that absentee ballot to count. Let's go to the next slide. And yes, please, if you have problems, please call our friends at Disability Rights Ohio, but also you can call the Election Protection Hotline, and there are, that's available in multiple languages. English is 866-RVOTE, but we also have a Spanish language hotline. We have a hotline for Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Bengali, Hindi, Urdu, and Tagalog, as well as an Arabic hotline. What the job of election protection is to help voters with information and to document voter problems and to remove those barriers. So if that means we need to have a lawyer discuss an issue with the Board of Elections, we do that right there. But it also informs all of our advocacy in the long term. League of Women Voters brought a lawsuit after the 2004 election, long lines. Part of that was about disability access, and it was calls coming into this hotline that helped us make the case in court about those issues. Let's go to the next slide. Please remember that if you are able to get off work and you are, we would love to have you be a poll worker. You can earn money while seeing democracy right up front. If you or someone in your life is a 17-year-old high school senior, you can be a poll worker and you get paid and you get your volunteer credit for school. If you're an attorney, accountant, or realtor, you can get free continuing education credit. And some nonprofits actually have their members work the polls, and then that money they donate back to their favorite organization. It's such a great idea. And about poll workers, we need about 35,000 every year, and poll workers really are the backbone of our democracy. You know, if you're voting early or you're voting on election day, it's a poll worker, a volunteer poll worker who works one day a year and gets a stipend for that. Is checking you in, is making sure you have what you need. And so we really love having poll workers from very diverse backgrounds who will understand and advocate for the needs of various voters. I don't know if we're going to be able to, because I see we're sharing Jamie's screen. I was going to walk through our Vote 411, but you know what? I'm not going to, because that way we'll have more time for questions. But vote411.org is our nonpartisan voter guide. You can go in there and you can enter your address, and that will help you know what precinct you live in, what is going to appear on your ballot. You can compare candidates. You can print that off. It's certainly something you can use in advance if you're going to early vote or going to vote in person at your neighborhood polling location on election day. But also you can just pull it up if you are sitting at your kitchen table per se and filling out your absentee ballot. You can do your research right there. Vote 411, also you can check your registration. You can find out all the steps for absentee ballots. You can track your absentee application and ballot. So everything you need should be at vote411.org. And what I will say is there are some counties that we may not have local races, but every state house, congressional race, and federal race, there is information there for you. Next slide. And, you know, here's the thing. We do have some lawsuits. We do have some things that could change between here and the election. And so getting updates on social media is a really great way to find out if anything's changed in terms of elections, or just to get helpful reminders. So of course we will be sharing images about, as we get closer to voter registration deadline, sharing throughout the election cycle, sharing things like how to track your ballot, all those things. So you can find us and our nonpartisan election protection hotline on the web, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I think that's it for now. That's our general contact information, and we love to serve you and work with you. We do have some materials in braille that will tell you everything you need to know to vote. So if that's something you want, please let us know ASAP. We're getting ready to order those, and those would be free to you. We just would love to get them to you. And with that, I say thank you.
And thank you, Jen. That was great information. Before we go to questions, we have one more speaker, our very own CDE Executive Director, Sue Hetrick.
Hello, everyone. I just need to make a quick correction on the slide that has my name. My name is spelled with a T, not a D. Didn't catch that typo before. So if you do want to contact anybody at CDE on anything that I'm talking about today, feel free. And Carla started out the presentation by showing a picture of Justin Dart, and the quote that he's famous for saying, that vote as if your life depends on it, because it does, is actually and absolutely true. So what I want to speak for a few minutes about is the importance of voting and what's at stake. We know that people we're electing, whether it's in our local town or at the state level or the federal level, they are going to have a huge impact, most likely, on our lives. And they're going to determine policies and laws about our healthcare, about transportation, about housing, what's going to be available to us, what kind of education we receive, what kind of funding all of those things get for us. So it's really important. We know that because of term limits, eventually those people are probably not going to be in office anymore. And we're going to go through the process again and elect those officials that fill those roles. One distinct exception to that is something that's bubbled up now. And Carla also mentioned the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I think it's a role that the president has that people don't often consider. So a president has the ability to appoint judges for federal court. That's all of the regional courts for the states, and also the Supreme Court, which you hear most often about. Those judges are appointed for a lifetime. For the rest of their lives, they're in that position. So a president we elect has great power to put those people in their positions. And it's an important issue because the decisions that those judges often make are really going to impact our lives, likely for the rest of our lives. So it truly is true that when you vote, you're voting as if your life depends on it. So often, for many years, the disability community has been trying to organize themselves so that they're becoming a powerful voting bloc. And what I mean by a voting bloc is that there's a group of people perhaps that have common issues. Might be something that impacts them directly, might be something that impacts someone like them directly. And they're voting on policies and positions that are important to them, in our case, to the disability community. A good example for that is the American Association of Retired Persons, or AARP. You might be familiar with them. They are a powerful voting bloc. So that when AARP sends out a notice to their members that there is a law up for a vote and these elected officials are voting on it, you need to call these elected officials to tell them that what they're voting on is bad for senior citizens, or call them and tell them that what they're voting for is good for senior citizens. And they all do that as a block. The problem with the disability community is that we're part of the largest minority in the country that vote with the least frequency. So if people with disabilities voted as if they didn't have disabilities at the same rates, there would be a huge impact on the disability community across the country. So let me give you just a couple of examples here, what I'm talking about. There are two professors at Rutgers University who study voter turnout, specifically voter turnout of people with disabilities. In the 2016 presidential election, the voter turnout of people with disabilities was 6% lower than those voting without disabilities. That means that only about half of all people with disabilities who were eligible to vote in the 2016 presidential election actually did vote. So if the voters with disabilities in 2016 had turned out, there would have been 2.2 million more voters if they turned out like people who didn't have disabilities. And then in 2018, which of course wasn't a presidential election year, wasn't the big election we experience now, they found that there was a little bit of a surge with people with disabilities. That surge was by a little 8.5% more compared to 2014, which was also an off presidential year. But those voting who didn't have disabilities also surged by almost 12%. So that means that those without disabilities had 4.7 more voters than those with disabilities. In that election, if people with disabilities had voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, there would have been 2.35 million more voters. So if we increase the vote of people with disabilities and we look at candidates who are supporting our issues, we could make a huge impact on the turnout of an election in our lives. So where do you go? Where do you look for information on candidates to find out what maybe is relevant to people with disabilities? You can go to their campaign websites and you can look for their platform or their policy and see if it talks about things that are of interest to you, are of interest particularly to people with disabilities: healthcare, education, transportation, housing. And then if they don't have anything on their website, they don't have a platform, they don't have their position on policies, I'd encourage you to Google their campaign office, call their campaign office, tell them you're looking for more information on those issues, you're not finding it on their website, and would they be able to answer those questions for you? In Carla's introductory slides as well, she talked about Justin Dart being one of the founders of AAPD, not to be confused with AARP, but AAPD, American Association of People with Disabilities. And you can find them at aapd.com, and we'll send that information out. And I'll show you that site actually in a minute. So AAPD and the National Council on Independent Living, or NCIL as we call them, sent questionnaires to both of the presidential candidates this year, asking them about their positions on issues that were important to people with disabilities. And this information and information on candidate positions and disability issues are available on AAPD's website. So aapd.com has the information on it about the questionnaire to the presidential candidates, issues that are important to people with disabilities. If you go to the AAPD site, there's tabs at the top. One says advocacy. If you scroll down to the voting topics, Rev Up is AAPD's Get Out the Vote initiative, which has gone national and almost viral in the disability community. There's also a link to a voting seminar that was held recently. It was national as well, with a whole host of speakers speaking about disability issues, candidates, and how the importance of voting as a block. Other helpful information that you might look for, which Jen and I were just talking about, is to know who candidates are getting their campaign contributions from. It's a little bit difficult to find, but we have identified that opensecrets.org has information on the federal level on who candidates are getting their campaign donations from. And followthemoney.org also has information regarding to state candidates who they're getting their donations from. And if you follow the money most frequently, you know how candidates, if they're elected, are going to vote. If I got a huge donation from US Steel, the US Steel Corporation, and a bill comes up that will give some tax advantages to US Steel, you can bet that as an elected official, I'm going to vote for US Steel to benefit from that because they gave me this huge donation. So it is interesting to follow up if you can on these sites to identify who candidates in your area or who you're interested in are receiving their campaign donations, and you'll therefore see where their loyalty lies. On the flip side of that, I'd have to say, and I'm going to repeat something that the director of the Ability Center of Greater Toledo often says, especially I think on these more local and maybe the statewide races, even as people with disabilities, even if we have just a little bit of money, it makes a difference to make a $5, $10 donation to the candidate of your choice. They do notice, particularly the state and the local level candidates. And money talks. They know that you were interested enough in them to support them with $5, $10, $20, whatever you can give. Doesn't go unnoticed. So that after the election, if they're elected, and you're going to their office and discussing particular issues with them, they're going to be, and Jen, you can jump in if you disagree with this, but I think they're going to be more receptive to what you have to say. So I think there's also another site, and again, we'll send that out as well, kind of an unusual name, but it's called #CripTheVote. And Crip the Vote is part of the Disability Visibility Project, disabilityvisitabilityproject.com. And they have all kinds of information about candidates, candidate issues, the disability perspective on those candidate issues, and the election. So it would be worth your time to check that out. There is a link to that on our Facebook page. But again, we'll send that out when we wrap up and Carla provides additional information to you after this is over. So that's all I had. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sue, for those words. And I'm going to open this up now for our audience to ask any questions you may have from our panelists. We have about 8 minutes to do that. So let's hear from you.
I think we have one question already, which is how can people in nursing homes vote? And this is interesting this year for a couple of reasons. One is if you're in a facility, a lot of those facilities may have been polling locations in the past and they aren't now because of extra concerns about COVID-19. And so you might have individuals who've always just kind of walked down to the dining room to vote who now need to vote absentee. And in addition, you may be, it may be harder for volunteers or family members to get in to help individuals vote absentee. So one of the things you can do is you can make sure that the facility that you know that they have all the materials they need. You could actually drop off, even if you can't get into the location, you could drop off absentee ballot requests and you could pick those up and drive those to the Board of Elections. I wanted to just mention too that in terms of help, again, you know, for example, I know you may have someone who might need help reading or something, but they're in a facility. Usually their family might do that. They'll have to ask a worker at the facility. Again, that's fine. And as Maggie mentioned, you can always ask for helpers. They can't tell you how to vote, but they can assist you in the act of voting.
And I would also say that if you are a family member who has somebody that you love in a facility, I think Jen said, reach out and contact the facility and see what their plan is. A lot of them are making plans to help their residents vote. And if they need help making a plan, I know that's something that Disability Rights Ohio is doing, is helping facilities make plans to help their residents vote, especially this year. But being confined to a facility should not stop your ability to vote in any way, shape, or form. The people who work there should help them. And they should help whoever needs to vote get the accommodations they need to be able to complete that process.
We have a question in the chat. Are there any resources, Vote 411 wise, that are in simplified language for persons with disabilities, looking for very simplified info on candidates and issues?
Sue, do you want to go first?
Sure. It's a huge undertaking to take all ballot issues and initiatives and transform the language. It should be done from the get-go. That said, I think on the state and local level, few of the agencies who are usually nonprofits have the wherewithal to do that. There are national organizations like the ARC of the United States, SABE, which is Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, and I haven't checked out their website to see if they have addressed any of the federal issues or candidates on theirs. I'd have to check that out and get back to folks.
SABE is a really good resource. Thank you, Sue, for bringing that up. That's it is run by people with disabilities, often developmental disabilities, for people with developmental disabilities, and helps walk them through. They have what's called the SABE Voter Toolkit, which is really helpful for people, especially first-time voters who haven't exercised this right before, knowing what it's going to look like when they go through that process and what their rights are in that process. And I believe they do have that information in easy read format as well, but I'm not 100% sure.
And I'm not sure that they've gone so far either to do the simplified information on candidates and issues. I think it's more primarily the rights and responsibilities kinds of things. But it does, that's not to minimize the importance of this. It's very important, and it's just finding the resources to be able to do that, and to be able to do that in advance of elections and get the information out there.
What about some other, this is Carla, what about some other accessible resources for someone who may be low vision? Where can they go to get information on candidates and issues?
So Vote 411, actually, that's a way that it should be accessible for individuals with visual impairments. And I also just want to say, I wish that we had capacity to simplify the answers. One of the things about Vote 411 is what the candidates say is what you read. We don't edit it at all, in part because once you start editing, then you can get into kind of fairness or interpretation issues. So it's super complicated in that regard. But, you know, I know that any of us here, if you had a community of individuals with developmental disabilities that we wanted to kind of slow down and take things step by step, would be absolutely willing to speak, absolutely willing to try to think about ways to assist as they're considering candidates a little bit more.
Do we have any other questions out there?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do we have time for a case-specific question for a little bit of advice? Okay. So I'm tuning in today. My daughter Erica has a disability. She's 18. She registered to vote over the summer, and we submitted an application for absentee ballot for her. And we received a letter yesterday from Franklin County saying that they were unable to process the request because she was not registered to vote in Franklin County. So I scribed a letter to them, and I returned the form along with a photocopy of the acknowledgement of registration to vote that we received in July that tells her where her polling place is and everything else. And, I said, please see enclosed your own acknowledgement that she is in fact registered to vote as of July 22nd. Therefore, please process her request for an absentee ballot without delay. And I popped it in the mailbox for today, but I thought, would it be more prudent for me to try to call? I know if I try to call the Franklin County Board of Elections right now, I'm going to be on hold forever. And who knows if I'll even get through. If I do get through, would the person on the other end of the phone likely be able to confirm for me and say, like, I thought maybe it'd be quicker to call, but then again, if I'm sending them in writing a copy of the acknowledgement of her registration, maybe that would be more official and, more likely to actually get them to process that request.
So I think this is really great. So first off, happy birthday and welcome to being a lifelong voter. We're so excited for you. It's a big deal. Human mistakes just happen, and it could be that the person looking at it, that she's actually in the files as registered, and just that person is, we have to think how hard they're working and how much of this they do. So I think the fact that you had a copy of that and you shared that is great. I think calling them is also good. I don't know that it'll be too long of a call right now. As we get closer to the election, the wait lines, but I bet you'll get through pretty quick. So if you have time to do both, go ahead and do both, and I'm sure it'll get fixed.
Okay, great, thanks.
That's good advocacy, Mom. And I concur with Jen. I would suggest doing both, and I'm a big fan, as my staff will tell you, of building a paper trail. It's one thing to call, but you have it documented if you keep copies of what you sent. And then if things don't turn out so well and it's not resolved, then you call our friends at Disability Rights Ohio, and they'll help take it to the next level, I'm sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for the great question, and our panelists for their time that they gave us today and their great information. Remember, we will be providing this to you. Everyone who registered will be getting this slide deck and additional resources that we talked about today.
Really quick, Carla,
Sure.
we have one more raised hand.
Okay. Okay. If everybody can stay on the line, I'm okay with that. Is our panelists good?
Hi, I'm so sorry that you're trying to close the meeting and my hand was up. I feel bad. I just had a quick clarification question about what Maggie was talking about earlier, about if there's an emergency and you're in the hospital on election day or for a minor child. So if you're planning to vote on election day and you have something like that, you would need to get the form, this application form in by 3 o'clock on election day. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
So
correct.
if there's something like you have a car accident on the way to the polls, like you may be screwed because you're probably not getting anything in by 3 o'clock. And after that, if you explain it, there was an accident, you're just out of luck. Is that right?
So maybe.
Okay.
is the answer. So you have to have the request in by 3 p.m. But that's not saying that you personally have to, like, you can contact Disability Rights Ohio and have us start the process of getting that form in and getting it completed. Because a lot of times if you are in the hospital for some unforeseen circumstances, you personally may not be the one who can navigate the process, which is why we encourage people to contact us, because we already have the contacts. We've done this work many, many times in a row over the years. And can help you navigate that process. So as long as you can, I would encourage you to contact us. I mean, obviously if you get in a car accident, that may not be the first thing that you're going to think about doing. But if it is something that you're able to do, you can contact us and have us start the process so that we can hopefully
Use your hotline.
Yeah, use our hotline number, which is the same as our regular intake number. There's just going to be an extra button to press to say I have a voting question this year. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. In Ohio, we have 1.5 million people with disabilities, and I hope all of you get out there and vote. And if you have any questions, you can reach us here at CDE. This is our contact information, and also all of our presenters provided contact information. So there's a number of places to go. Please call, email questions, and thank you again to our presenters and our tech help. I greatly appreciate it. So I hope to see you again at another ADA Talks in October. And remember, November 3rd, get out and vote. Bye-bye.